Hi, everybody. This is Al. We're in Philadelphia. It's a nice autumnal day here for week 7. Week 7. Anna.
Yo.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Lily.
Good morning.
Hi. Davy.
Good morning, Al.
Jess.
Good morning.
Hi. We think Amber Rose is coming. That's why there's a seat and a mug of tea sitting to my left. We also have Erica. And here's Amber Rose, everybody. Good morning, Amber Rose. Erica Kaufman, hello.
Hey.
Say a good word. What's a good word?
It is beautiful this morning.
Oh, you're in such a good spot for
yeah, the
autumn.
leaves are banging.
Yeah. What did you just say? Leaf banging? Oh, I don't even want to think about that.
I'm not fully caffeinated yet. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Gabe, I see Gabe. Hi, Gabe.
Hello, hello.
I was talking to somebody from Chicago yesterday, and that person reminded me that whatever's going on in Chicago is going to happen to us the next day. I didn't realize weather moved that fast.
It's it's already getting gross. But with the magic of the I'm transmitting directly from my bed.
Okay, that's cool. Are you slamming your microphone or something? We're getting all kinds of interference. Stop moving around. Okay. Good morning, Gabe. Max, Chicago. Hey, buddy.
Good morning, Al.
Hey. I saw Amaris before, which seems bizarre since it's 6 a.m., but, there's Amaris. Hello.
Max looked around.
Good morning.
Sorry, I lost
Hi, Amaris.
Wow.
6 a.m. You're a trooper.
That's right.
Max just got bumped. That's cold.
Is that what happened?
Yeah, you bumped him.
I don't know how it...
That's cold.
Okay, I didn't mean to. We're here to talk about the New York School. Amber Rose, good morning.
Good morning, Al.
I have just some shout outs and then 2 forum posts that I just wanted to start us with. And I'll do a list of the poems as usual. I'll tell you what the phone number is and we can get started. Here's some shout outs. Zach, I'm going to hold some things up. So this is Jose Reyes, Jody, a good friend of ModPo. This is a new chapbook called Present Values. He gave me this copy recently when we met him in Boston. Really nice. Congratulations on that. Katrin Horowitz, who's a longtime ModPoer, wrote this book, Just This. And anybody know where that's from? Anna? Just This. Where in ModPo is it from?
It's
one of your favorites, I think.
know. And
oh, it's 9 in the morning. What do you got
God.
in that mug?
Not enough, apparently.
How about Mike McGee?
A.
Right? The Pledge of Allegiance?
Yep. It is one
And
of my
Just
favorites.
This.
That's embarrassing.
for
Catcher,
all.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Carol Stephen from Canada. Lost Silence of the Small. Very ModPo-ish book of wonderful poems. We have Alana Shaw, who's one of our faves out there in California. And this is her contribution to, the subtitle of this special issue, it's called What Are We 8? We Are What We Ate. I'm such an idiot. We Are What We Ate. It's subtitled Consumerism Reshaping Thought. So it's a lot of experimental concrete poems, and there's some really good stuff that Alana is doing. And the epigraph to hers is a quote from me: "The how of what I'm doing is the what." So that's pretty cool. T. De Los Reyes, Woman, poems. I think I've shown this before. It's a wonderful little book. I've also shown this one before. This is Jeremy Dixon's In Retail. This is about Jeremy's experience in a retail store. It's really a great book. Really, it's getting a lot of good reviews. Mike James, First-Hand Accounts from Made Up Places, very influenced by Ashbery. Also a ModPoer. I mean, ModPo is like generating books. I mean, these people are generating the books, but we're inspiring people. Anthony Watkins, The Lost Season, one of his several books that I own. Gosh, we're cute. Mimi Shapiro. People will remember Mimi from way back in ModPo. She's a southeastern Pennsylvania person. This is a gorgeous handmade book called A Feather in Mexico, Walking Poems. and Zen proverbs. Really nice. I'm not giving any of these away. Sophia Naz has a new book, Our Friend Sophia. These are called Date Palms. Beautiful book. I'm tempted to read one, but I won't because I want to get to Ellen Dillon, who's, I believe, in Dublin or Ireland. I hope that I'm not getting that wrong, Ellen. And Ellen's a longtime ModPoer. Sonnets to Malcolmus. Beautiful book. And then I'm going to ask Lily to comment on this one.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a book written by kids in Lisa Yao's class in Philadelphia. And as Lily will tell you briefly, Lisa participated in a special version of ModPo, and her kids produced poems which are intended to demystify depression. So did you want to say anything about that group of kids?
Yeah, this is Lisa's project with her fifth graders, and it's part of a larger program that I'm forgetting what it's called, but the students vote on an issue that's most important to them or that they want to learn more about, and then they do kind of a research project, and then they did each student wrote a poem that's collected in the book with illustrations also. And it's kind of amazing that as fifth graders they chose depression as their topic, but I think that there had been some events going on at the school that made it a pertinent topic. So it's all, each page is an individual student's poem with illustrations, and then Lisa bound them into a book.
And Lisa is a fantastic teacher and really was inspired by the close reading method, which she's applying to elementary school kids, which is so fantastic. Okay, I want to get us started by quoting two ModPoers from the forums. I'll invite, I'll invite Max, Davey, and Allie. Good morning, Allie. Hi. I'll invite Max, Allie, and Davey to respond in any way they like. One is from Helen O'Neill, whom we met in Boston, and it's about the day Lady died. And another is from Orit Kruglansky about Ashbery's The Instruction Manual. And I'd invite us to talk about either of those poems as a way of getting started on the New York School. Orit Kruglansky has been participating. I think Orit has made maybe 36 posts since the start, and is, I think, a new ModPoer, and is halfway through the course and doing well, and it's really nice to see this comment. Okay, here's Helen on the day Lady died. Such a great panel discussion, meaning our video. I read this line as a good omen. The line is, Miss Stillwagon doesn't even look up my balance for once in her life. And this is Helen thinking about Miss Stillwagon and our relationship to the Miss Stillwagons of our world, our lives. I read this line as a good omen for O'Hara's day. This teller, the bank teller, is most likely always giving him a hard time about his bank account, etc. But this day, she doesn't even check his balance to be sure he has enough money to cash the check. Things might be looking up for him, especially as the line follows a line from the first stanza. I don't know the people who will feed me, meaning later tonight when he arrives out in the Hamptons, detailing the anonymity of the city, the interactions of its people, the magazine he buys with the ugly cover. He even happens to know the teller's first name. This quasi-relationship with Miss Stillwagon might be setting the stage for him, O'Hara, to remember Billie Holiday and the song she sang. A person he loved and admired but didn't know personally. He stood close enough to hear as she whispered the song, close enough to remember he couldn't breathe. So there's a connection Helen wants to make between the Miss Stillwagons of our daily lives and someone as important as Billie Holiday. And then there's Orit's comment on Ashbery, which is really funny. I like this. Hi, I just wanted to point out that while the visit to Guadalajara is imagined, so is the instruction manual he has to write. And what is an instruction manual on a new metal anyway? Right? A metal is a raw material. I don't think they come with instructions. In other words, it's all bullshit. So the whole experience of being oppressed by boring work and escaping to an imagined experience is, well, imagined. It's a really acute comment. Okay, so Davey, Max, Allie, thoughts on either of those things, Miss Stillwagon or Ashbery making it all up? Yeah, Davey?
So something that Helen's comment about Miss Stillwagon is making me think of is a exactly contemporaneous New Yorker to O'Hara, who's the sort of armchair urbanist Jane Jacobs, who publishes...
Can you unpack that?
Yeah, I'm about to.
Okay.
Who publishes a book in 1961 called The Death and Life of Great American Cities, which is basically a book that she writes observing life in New York in the 1950s and imagining a form of kind of small-scale citizen urbanism as a refusal of sort of like large-scale projects of pushing people out of their homes and building enormous buildings. And something that she talks about, which is sort of like the conversation about weak ties that we were having, is she uses the phrase tiny private contacts are what make up a city. So like O'Hara's relationship with Miss Stillwagon, like what's specific about cities is that you're like coming into like tiny little bits of contact with people in relationships that we might describe as weak ties. And something that's cool about O'Hara is that Jane Jacobs is thinking about like the bank teller and like the teacher in your child's preschool class and like a pretty like normative set of people. And for him, the bank teller and the like gay club are part of that logic. So he's like, I see that as both like a continuation of like, here's my New York, here are the like tiny contacts that make up the city for me. And here's like O'Hara's refusal of those contacts only being normative ones.
Fantastic. Thank you, Davey, for that good start. Allie Castleman, your thought on either of these things?
Yeah, I'm just kind of reeling from the... Hi, can you hear me?
I'm waving at Zach, actually. You keep talking.
Oh, okay. I think the observation that the instruction manual itself is imaginary is so great, and one that I've never had myself. But I think you can kind of bring that observation in with this connection we're talking about in The Day Lady Died, and just thinking about imaginary or at least kind of elaborated relationships that we have with celebrity who in a kind of material way we don't know any more than we know the Miss Stillwagons of the world. But I think it's interesting to kind of pay attention to how other artists and writers are kind of just constantly coming into The Day Lady Died. That by the time we get, I mean, Frank O'Hara in this poem has so many connections to those people as well, who you could say he only has imaginary relationships with, even though he's physically engaging in the work. And so by the time we get his memory about being in the club, in the 5 spot, it's part of what's so touching to me is the almost physicality of that presence. While she whispered a song along the keyboard, when he's thinking about it, he's sweating, and then he stopped breathing. It's so like intimately attached to the most kind of like essential functions of his body, and so that kind of combination of things is just really moving to me.
Thank you, Allie. Max, your thought on either of these things, Miss Stillwagon or Ashbery's? I'm interested in the implication in that comment that Ori made about avoiding work, right? I mean, it really is a poem about being so bored at work that you have to imagine avoiding the work. And then in order to imagine an escape from the imagining of avoiding it, I mean, it's a double imagining. That's how bored he is. Max?
Right, and I like to think of Ashbery, as Ori has suggested, right? Ashbery not even at work, maybe just like in his favorite writing place, wherever that is, and imagining himself at work in order to get hyped up to write
That's
this
so
poem.
funny. Maybe he wrote it in a fucking downtown cafe.
Maybe he was having the time of his life. He was doing exactly what he wanted to be doing at that moment. So yeah, this, and I think that we start seeing that already with the beats, and we're going to see that through this week, right? This relationship to work, or to what or the impositions that our system, whether it's an economic system, political system, however you want to identify it, makes on our time and agency and our creativity. And I think that that's a crucial thing here. And also a little bit with the O'Hara poem, just to continue with Helen's comment about Miss Stillwater. I think in that poem, or the observation about Miss Stillwater, kind of keys us into the way that people in this poem are always wielding various kinds of like institutional or systemic authority, whether it's like people with published books, right, which kind of makes their names pop out in the poem, or if it's Miss Stillwater, who because of some personal relationship today is not shaming him because of his balance, or asking him to pay his debts, or whatever it is that's happening here. So I think that there's a lot of that kind of going on throughout the New York School. It'd be interesting to pay attention to.
Thank you, Max. Let me just make a list of the poems, and then we can look at each other and sort of deduce from our expressions which poem we want to talk about. Zach, I'm losing Amaris in the little... Oh, she did. Okay. All right. So the number is 610-616-3208, 610-616-3208. And I have a really amazing book to give away to the second caller. It's partly amazing that I'm giving this away because it's super expensive. This just came out. It's so Marjorie Perloff has written reviews of poets, of new books of poetry for, well, the earliest one here is in 1969. They're really hard to find, and often, in a way, one could argue her most powerful form is the book review. That's arguable because obviously she's written full-scale critical books. But this is for the first time the selected book reviews. It just came out from the University of New Mexico Press. It's ridiculously expensive, and I have an extra copy that I'm going to give away to the second caller. And I think some people at this table will actually call in to get the book. Okay, before I make the list, Dina Perot, good morning. Mary Armour.
That's a question for Davey, I think, that Mary Armour question.
When that wasn't a question, it's just restating Davies.
But like Davey could riff on that, and it'd be really cool.
Yeah. Well, I think
I just kind of want to hear Davey
reference
do that.
comes from Davey.
I know.
Okay. Anyway, Mary's simply telling us what Davey said.
I want to hear Davey do it
too. Good morning, Anna. I just want to say hi to her in South Africa, in Cape Town. That means that 9 a.m. really works for a lot of people, not to the east of us. And Sanjeev in Boston and others. All right, here are the poems. In the main syllabus, The Day Lady Died, O'Hara, we just talked about it. Kenneth Coates, Variations on a Theme by Williams. I don't know if we want to talk about that. The new video on that just came out recently from June. It's a good video. Ashbery's The Instruction Manual. Second O'Hara poem, A Step Away from Them, another lunch poem. So Barbara Guest's 20, which some people have said is the most amazing poem of this week, now to be rivaled by Jimmy Schuyler's February. Everybody's loving that one. That's new to the main syllabus. Thank you, Davey, for suggesting it. 2 poems by Ashbery. In addition, Some Trees, which is a sort of anthemic poem for ModPo, and Hard Times, an Ashbery poem that's a surprisingly political poem about the Reagan-era idea of trickle-down economics, among other things. Ted Berrigan's 3 Pages, Bernadette Mayer's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is a real autumn poem, and Patrick Rosal's, we could call him kind of a third-generation respondent to the New York School. It's called Uptown Ode, that ends with an ode to the machete. And some highlights from ModPo Plus, another O'Hara poem called Like, which I really like. Ashbery's Just Walking Around, another anthemic poem, another Schuyler poem, Salute. Lots and lots of Bernadette Mayer, including 2 favorites, Chocolate Poetry Sonnet and the incorporation of Sophia's Serial, for which there's a brand new video that, have we posted? I think we posted it to ModPo Plus. I did. I think I did. Lots of Eileen Miles, 3 of them Mounts. So Eileen Miles, a second-generation New York school poet, among other things. Mount St. Helens, Snakes, and Writing, 3 great poems. And Hanif Abdurakib's relatively new addition to ModPo Plus called USA versus Cuba, which is a response to O'Hara. All right, those are a lot of good poems. Allie, when you heard that list, what's a poem that made you excited?
This is my favorite week, so it's really hard to pick one.
Well, just pick one. We're not going to go with it. Just tell us what you think, and we'll take some more consensus.
I'm still kind of stuck on February.
February, good. Okay, Gabe, what's a poem that really, when you heard my list, your blood pressure lowered when you heard the one?
I would say 20 or February.
Okay, 20 or February, good. All right. Jess, this is your first year doing this week with us. Get that mic real close to you and tell us. Oh, you're really thinking this through.
Do I have to answer? Can I kind of
No, you
dodge
don't have
it?
to.
I mean, I'd be happy to discuss any of these.
Okay, thank you. That's nice of you. Jason, do you have the mic?
Yes, I do.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's good
Give
to
us
see you.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm okay.
Good. Give us a title of a poem.
Probably February.
All right, we're going to do February. Should we listen to Jimmy read it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Brand new to ModPo. While I'm finding it, Davey, say why you think it's just so good and crucial that we added this to the main syllabus. We don't add much to the main syllabus these days.
A couple of quick reasons. We talk about the New York School in ModPo as being peripatetic, as involving like dudes walking around. And this is a poem in which Schuyler is not doing that. And Schuyler, as a person with bipolar disorder, very frequently was writing from his house and was thinking about the way that he might engage with the city and like have an urban experience from inside that's also a domestic experience and kind of mess with that boundary. And I think also it's a poem that his work gets written about as pastoral, as urban pastoral. And February is a poem that is just like really refusing that binary. And I think that like this poem like really blows up all of the ways that we have gotten kind of used to talking about the New York School, and encourages us to both think about expansive and inclusive and non-ableist ways of talking about the New York School, but also to take that attention and pivot it back to the New York School poems that we love.
So well said. That's like a head note. Thank you. I found, Zach, Chris, Anna, I found something really horrifying just now, which is that the great recording of Schuyler reading this poem is not in the syllabus.
Ooh.
We forgot to add it.
Whoops. So
we got some work to do. But, of course, it's on Pen Sound, and I'm about to play it with a little background. By the way, Poem Talk podcast number 85 is about this poem from back in 2015. And you know who the 3 poem talkers were that day?
Davey, and Davey.
I don't think you were even on campus in 2015, right? Okay. Julia Block, Erica Kaufman, and Bernadette Mayer.
What?
It's so good. Bernadette takes the whole thing. I mean, she just ran with it. She's just so funny. Okay, so, and the recording, it comes from his first public reading in 1968 at the Dia Art Foundation, introduced by John Ashbery, and the Ashbery introduction is fantastic. All right, so here's Jimmy Schuyler reading February.
February. A chimney breathing a little smoke. The sun I can't see making a bit of pink I can't quite see in the blue. The pink of 5 tulips at 5 p.m. on the day before March 1st. The green of the tulip stems and leaves, like something I can't remember. Finding a Jack in the Pulpit a long time ago and far away. Why, it was December then, and the sun was on the sea, by the temples we'd gone to see. One green wave moved in the violet sea, like the UN building on big evenings. green and wet while the sky turns violet. A few almond trees had a few flowers, like a few snowflakes, out of the blue looking pink and light. A gray hush in which the boxy trucks roll up 2nd Avenue into the sky. They're just going over the hill. The green leaves of the tulips on my desk, like grasslight on flesh, and a green copper steeple and streaks of cloud beginning to glow. I can't get over how it all works in together, like a woman who just came to her window and stands there filling it, jogging her baby in her arms. She's so far off. Is it the light that makes the baby pink? I can see the little fists and the rocking horse motion of her breasts. It's getting grayer and gold and chilly. 2 dog-sized lions face each other at the corners of a roof. It's the yellow dust inside the tulips. It's the shape of a tulip. It's the water in the drinking glass the tulips are in. It's a day like any other.
All right. So beautiful. Okay, what I'd like to do is a little risky here, but you have to play along, okay? You have to go with this. I'm going to ask a lot of people to make a comment, but each comment has to be super brief. So just give us a response to the poem or point to a line or an idea in it. So it's going to be Anna, Lily, Amber Rose, Jess, Jason, Erica, Amaris, and Gabe. That's a lot of people, but I want to hear what you have to say. Anna first, quickly. It's got to be brief.
So much of this poem is seems really specific, but in fact is kind of slippery. Like the way that the colors are kind of fading in and out, and lots of colors get applied to lots of the same things, and different things get described with different colors, and colors are just like kind of constantly sort of shifting in this poem, is really remarkable. And I also noticed that same kind of slipperiness, like it's exact in its inexactness. The pink of 5 tulips at 5 p.m. on the day before March 1st. Well, we know that could either be February 28th or February 29th. Like, we don't know. Depends on like what year this poem was written. So it kind of like lifts this whole thing out of time and out of color and out of space in a way that it's just really amazing.
That's fantastic.
The way the whole poem just moves.
Thank you, Anna. Lily, briefly, a thought?
I think usually when we use color to describe something, it's in the spirit of being exact. And we think of color as like a way to exactly differentiate something like the green chair or the brown chair or whatever. And he's choosing colors that are surprising, like violet, sea, but then the more you think about it, you realize like, oh, that I can see that. So I like that it's kind of creating an impression, not an impressionistic isn't the right word, like maybe abstract expressionist is the right word or whatever, but like a painting in front of him.
Fantastic. Thank you. Amber Rose, your thought?
My brief thought. My brief thought is that I'm thinking about how this conversation about light and color reminds me of a conversation I think we were having in week 5 about like looking at a poem, looking at an object and the kind of light or the aura that's cast sort of around the object by nature of putting it in a poem. And I think he displays that really beautifully in the question where he asks, is it the light that makes the baby pink? Is it my seeing the baby that makes? Is the baby actually pink? What is the relationship between what I'm seeing and what I'm producing by making this observation and communicating it to you? So just thinking about that from a couple weeks ago.
That's lovely. And also there's an urban distance because the baby's presumably in another building across the way. And so there's a kind of atmosphere that you have to look through. You know, there's like air particles, and it's the end of the day.
It's a very like Rear Window moment, you know.
No, except not as creepy.
Not as creepy.
Yeah. Jess, thought quick on this poem.
Sure. I'll try to
you
be.
You like it?
I love it. I'll try to be brief, which will be difficult, I think. But I was also thinking back to maybe the webcast that Amber Rose referenced, specifically the discussion of Marianne Moore's Imaginary Gardens with Real Toads in them.
Yeah.
And the comment about the Ashbury instruction manual being imagined brought my mind back to that comment. And I think that something that I was thinking about with respect to that poem is also something that I'm thinking about with this poem. And that's that, like, the so-called raw material of, like, observation or, like, what is seen is being played with in a really wonderful way. And, like, the line or the phrase that's very striking to me in this poem is, "I can't see." And I think, Anna, what you said about the exact inexactness is really apt, and it points to, like, this the slipperiness of the line between, like, the line that we think exists but actually doesn't, between, like, what is observed and what is imagined.
Well said. Jason, quick thought?
Well, I mean, in a way, we have what appears to be the record of someone's conscious thoughts in process as they're perceiving, and those perceptions are leading to relational thoughts. What strikes me is, I didn't notice this before, but the green leaves on the tulips on my desk, like grass light on flesh, we have a like. It's a metaphor. The grass light is not necessarily on the flesh at the moment. And as the same as like a woman who just came to her window, it flows so simply that we assume that there is a woman at her window, but it's not necessarily so.
Right, exactly.
And and I'm the four lines at the end, the it is contraction. I am just interested in.
Yeah, it's a powerful it. This is an it that Wallace Stevens perfected, which sort of means everything that we've been dealing with in this poem and all the issues that I bring to the poem from all my previous poems and everything that I've ever thought of, this whole thing, it's sort of the thing he can't get over, how it all works together. That's the it. That's great. Jason, thank you. Erica, your thought on this?
I'm thinking about something that Davy brought up, which is how this poem works in contrast to the other poems that we look at this week, particularly the refrain of "I can't," and how different that is from the O'Hara "I do this, I do that." And I'm also thinking about how this poem looks or is working in comparison to Barbara Guest. I think of Barbara Guest and Schuyler as both doing something different than Ashbery, O'Hara, and Coke. And I think that this poem and the poem in ModPo Plus by Barbara Guest is perhaps better than 20 are both examples of really intense looking as being central to New York School, and the subjectivity of looking as being something that happens through the action of a poem. And I think you see this a lot, like February is a really beautiful example of that.
Fantastic. The reference to the Barbara Guest poem in ModPo Plus is a reference to a poem called Roses, and it is explicitly thinking about Stein and Picasso and modernism. It's really worth, given the rose sub-theme of ModPo, it's worth looking at. Thank you so much, Erica. Amaris and then Gabe on February. Amaris? Hi, Amaris.
Show that it's his perception. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay.
Amaris, I
feel
think
like how
your
this poem, it's
connection
his
is
perception that's
slow.
bringing all these disparate elements.
Do you have Wi-Fi there?
I do.
Okay, sorry. You should contact your provider. But anyway, give it a try. You're going in and out. See what we can do here.
Okay. So I like it that it's his perception that's bringing all these elements of the city into harmony. And this poem really feels like watching the process of a painting being created. It's not just the colors that are lush, but this sentiment of gratitude that seems to bring the poem into coherence. And particularly that repetition of the it's in the last 4 lines. The same time, the poem is particular to this specific day, and yet it seems like it's an experience, gratitude and attention to detail that he's replicating every day. When he says it's a day like any other, but he's bringing that sensitivity to his everyday, regular basis.
I love the idea that the attitude, the tone of gratitude helps synthesize, brings things together. Mm-hmm. It's really so Schuyler-esque and really New York schoolish. Okay, Gabe, your thought on February, and then we're going to move on. The number is 610-616-3208. Gabe, hi.
Hi. So as Davey was saying, because it's not a peripatetic poem, but it's a poem of looking through the window, it's a poem that takes the windows quite seriously rather than just presenting it as like a sort of thing in the way. It really thinks about that frame of the window quite seriously. And I agree with Amaris that it's sort of like the frame of the window becomes like a painting frame, so that what's being seen outside is thought about in a more sort of like honestly artificial way. And I think like what's so interesting, just going back to Jason's comment, is like the work that the it does in that whole equation of framing, of visualization. You have that it all, but you also have, like Tracy Morris's it all, but you also have the way that the it's at the end are moving from like the tip of the tulip to the shape of the tulip to the bottom to the water in the tulip to just the entire day. There's something really going on there with frames.
Mm. Gabe, that last thing you said, it makes me think that one of the things that poets of, all times and all cultures have done is exactly what you described. Poetry, the idea of poetry is you start with an observation or particular, and then you physically look outward from there to see if you can make some tentative generalizations about the world. I think philosophy kind of works in the opposite way. Of course, there are exceptions to both of these statements, but philosophy is really good at saying something like Proposition 1.001, the world is all that is the case. I mean, that's a brilliant statement, but what the hell, What I'd like to do is collect some thoughts from Twitter and also from the forums, and then we'll kind of collectively decide where we're going. I'm going to start with Twitter. Someone who identifies as Tan Speaks, T-A-N or Tan, also goes by @StupidPoetry, is really grateful for the 9 a.m. time because Tan Speaks is in Krasnoyarsk, which is in Siberia, and is watching us live from Siberia. So 9 a.m., I'm guessing it's Siberia. I'm going to guess... Stupid poet. Sorry, I'm going to call you Tan Speaks, not Stupid Poetry. Tan Speaks. I'm guessing it's early evening. Probably.
Aren't there like 4 time zones in Siberia alone?
Yeah, there you go. Anyway, other
that big.
Other tweets. Who's looking at tweets?
Lily.
Yeah,
Lily?
Mary Armour is like echoing what Davey said. Non-ableist thinking about New York school is so important. And
absolutely.
Sanjeev is wondering if anyone has created a word cloud of all the colors in February, so we could know which color was repeated the most times. He says he thinks pink.
It's a deeply, wonderfully Sanjeev question.
Sweet. And let's see, Rama is saying that they also noticed precise color assignments in the instruction manual, so something we could talk about with that. Dina Peral wonders, does anyone else think of Sid Corman's it isn't for want when reading, just walking around?
Yeah, come not for me, but it. That's Cormania.
Kim Harrison says, that's it, I'm planting roses next spring. Ambrose.
Yeah, there's a question about what exactly makes it a non-ableist like why it's useful to think of this as a non-ableist poem or to give that sort of lens. I would think because most of the New York school is about these folks actually going out and walking around and buying things and interacting in that way, and he is sitting from inside his house, presumably at his desk, and making these observations. But I wonder if there are some other sort of valences to that reading.
Well, non-ableist could also be in a political sense that most of the people listening and all the people probably at this table and in the Hangouts feel is a good politics, which is necessarily the idea that if you are walking around like O'Hara does, you're going to be buying, spending, and consuming a lot of stuff. There's a kind of almost inherent critique of that if you aren't walking around. The guy who's just walking around in Ashbury is really not consuming stuff. It's a post-lunch poems kind of experience, and I almost think of it as aligned in this way. It's like walking around, but really not walking around.
It's more of an I see this, I see that, than an I do this, I do that.
It's also, good. It's also an end-of-life poem about love, so there's a way in which we knew John Ashbery personally. Mostly he was sitting in a chair. He was not a very mobile person, and I think it's a poem sort of about the imagining of mobility from that spot. But I think it's a really interesting point, Amber Rose, and I think Davey has a thought on this, but I hope it's brief.
The brief version of the thought is that you get to be part of the public sphere and part of public life in an O'Hara poem because you're outside or part of published material or part of commercial life. And I think of the Schuyler poem as non-ableist because it's not equating participation in the public sphere with participation in public space. That it's thinking about how people who spend a lot of their lives in what we might refer to as private space have perceptions of and ideas about and kinship relations that should be part of public life.
There's also the element of like the gendered relationship to this too, right? Because I mean, another sort of dichotomy that we can think about, sort of like a false binary, but one nonetheless that we can think about is the way that Bernadette Mayer's poem from this week, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, is engaging in that kind of private sphere space as a necessity of being sort of at home as opposed to being out in commercial space like O'Hara was. So it's really good and I think worthwhile work to sort of be complicating the sort of male outwardness, mobility with lots of other versions of this type of poetics, which is about daily life and about the sort of poetry of daily life and whatever forms that daily life takes.
Similar, it's a cousin intervention. The mayor saying, "Whoa! I like this New York stuff, but just had a baby. I'm upstate. Can't do it. I can't do this stuff. I've got other things." And Schuyler, who was very much part of the friend group, also was making a counter statement without being, annoying or political about it, really. And what's so beautiful about it is it's not the first poem he read at the first reading, but it's sort of a highlight poem in the first reading, and it was kind of like a coming out in a first time reading sense of coming out for him. We have someone on the phone. I just also thought of one last thing on February. Thank you all for talking about February. And thank you, Davey, for inspiring us to add it. It's not out there, and it's not really dealing in this sort of obvious public way. But then the UN is there. It's kind of a weird Schylerian hope for world peace. That if the UN could be seen a certain way, it would be great if it could function. I don't know. There's something about encountering the UN building down there on the street, which means you have to buy a bunch of trinkets or listen to a bunch of people bullshitting that doesn't actually make you hopeful. Who's on the phone?
We have somebody we saw pretty recently, Mandana, on the line.
Oh, wonderful. Hello, Mandana.
Hi, Al. How are you?
Great. We know that you love the New York school.
Yes, I wear my heart on my sleeve for that one.
You do. And you got to meet John Ashbery at least once before he passed away.
Yes, and I I don't think I was really speaking in English. I was probably speaking in tongues as I tried to stammer how much his poetry meant to me. And he looked at me very kindly and kept nodding.
Yeah, he did. He got that down. He had that down at that point. The kindly look and the nodding. Yeah.
But being in New York, I also just got to hear him several times, and that in and of itself was always a tremendous joy.
Mandana, you're not the second caller, but we're still going to give you a book.
I know that.
We're going to give you a book.
Thank you. See, I realize.
Wait! Look at your screen. Look at your screen. Zach.
Yeah.
May Bersenbrugge's Nest.
Oh, how wonderful! Thank you so much.
Lily
I think
will
I
mail
might
it
even
to
have
you.
that, but thank you so much.
We can bring it with us next week.
We can bring it with us to the Morgan. How's that sound?
Thank you so much.
All right, good. Do you have a comment or question this morning?
Well, a small one. I was thinking a lot as you all have been talking about some of the dichotomies of not only the writers in the New York School, or at least the writers in the 60s, but also of New York in general. This idea of loneliness and intimacy, life kind of being in the doing, in the being of it, in the doing of it. Probably Corman is more about the being of it, and I would suggest that the New York School is about the doing of it. And as you were talking about with February, exactitude as well as kind of a blurriness of distance.
Interesting. So can you, I'm looking around at my colleagues, can you put that into a question for people to answer, would you?
Okay. You get to pick who, though.
Okay, I'll pick who.
There'll be, okay. How important is the actual city itself in the New York School? I mean, we call it the New York School, but does New York have to be a character in the poetry for it to be New York School? Why or why not?
Okay, great question. And the following folks can answer it not specifically about whether New York has to be in it, although that's very interesting and important, but whether a city or the city has to be in it. Okay? All right, so we're going to go with Erica, Max, Allie, and Jess on this. Erica, first, your thought on the city in a New York School poem. The New York School is a funny phrase for this. It's seeming very limiting.
It does feel really limiting, and I kind of am tempted to wager that the city is necessary because it implies a certain binary of action where, a lot of New York School poems, whether it be Schuyler, where I think that the action is really in how he's teaching us that action comes through observation oftentimes for some people. But there needs to be the stimuli that you're responding to. This is something I think about a lot because I'm a New York City person who moved upstate not too long ago, and it changed my poetry.
Interesting. Fantastic. Max, and then Allie?
I think cities broadly, and then the American city over the course of the 20th century, if we want to get historical with it, are useful ways of thinking about, at least in this week, the shift from modernism to postmodernism, which is also what we're charting here. And I'm sure that somebody like Davey could probably speak to this better than I can, but I'll do my best. You have with high modernism, you have poets like responding to the new sort of frenetic energy of the turn of the century and early 20th century city, where there's just lots of collisions between people. You have this idea of the flaneur, and then you have here starting in the 60s, in this post-war period, you have, this was a period of population decline in New York City. How much O'Hara is sensing that or responding to that in this early moment is I'm not sure of, but I think that you kind of have this idea of the city as something that's becoming where a little bit of that energy of freneticism is dissipating out into the suburbs, and then you have this general dissipation of modernist energy, I think, and that's maybe one way of thinking of postmodernism.
Fantastic, Max. I like the way you tied your response to both the historical trend, but also the transition from modern to postmodern. This is an implication of ModPo, although we don't overtly do that kind of historical reading. Allie and then Jess.
I think the city and the New York school, when it's not explicitly in the poetry, is kind of in there specifically in its absence. So, for example, in some trees, the line "arranging by chance to meet as far from the world as agreeing with it." What is the world there if not the city? You know, like in that poem where in the middle of the woods, I imagine. And so there is this kind of like, I still think in that poem, there's this almost like unmentioned alternative that is the noise and freneticism of New York or any city.
Really well said. I love the way you, Mandana is listening to this. I love the way that you've taken the beloved early poem of Ashbery, Some Trees, and made it really another city poem. All I can think of is, pardon the personal reminiscence here, when Jane and I finally got out of New York after 9/11, I had been coming back and forth after a while between New York and Philly. She was in New York the entire time, and you just didn't leave. You were hunkered down, etc. We're down. Our apartment is downtown. And finally, I think it was like mid-October, we finally got in the car, my car. I found my way into the city, or maybe she met me in Newark by train, and we drove up into the Catskill Mountains. And it was a break. It was a beautiful break. The colors of the trees. It was really a pastoral. You know, we would, if we had written poems, they would have been nature poems. But every conversation, every sentence, everything we said, everything we thought was about the city, about New York in particular. Couldn't get away from it. And I think as far this morning from the world as agreeing with it is an extremely complicated statement about the city. Yeah. Okay. Jess, and then and Mandana. We'll talk to Mandana one more time and sign off. Meantime, if you're going to call, wait until Mandana's off at 610-616-3208. And Jess, while you're thinking of this, Atan Speaks from Siberia tells us it was 8 p.m. when we started. And so you are almost like my dinner guests. I am struck by February because I don't get any feelings of being trapped in his flat. It's radical to me. There's a lot of gratitude and almost patience with oneself. So a shout out to Tan Speaks in Siberia. Jess.
Great. Yeah, that was a lovely comment that you just read. I think I will hypothesize that the city itself is probably, as some others have been suggesting, inescapable, in part because there's there will never be a kind of stable meaning or content to the city itself. And that it is a kind of like, it has to do with experience and like, as we've been saying, like a particular body in relation to an urban space. And this conversation is making me think back, and this might be a bit of an aside, to Stein's composition as explanation, and this idea of the thing seen. And this maybe goes to what Max was saying about like kind of modernism and postmodernism. And if I can draw a kind of like ridiculous generalization, if like, you know, in prior weeks, you know, we were thinking about the things seen, right? Like in imagism, like objects, things seen. In this week, we're thinking more about like the poet seeing or the poem seeing and like the experience of that. So that's just to say that like, I don't really know how the city fits into that, but I think that kind of transition or that shift is like closely related to that question of the status of the city itself.
Fantastic. Mandana, are you there?
Yes, sir.
What do you think of all this?
Oh, I think it's fascinating. I wish I were there and could buy you all a big cup of coffee. You also have me thinking about how let's say last week is more, I think in a lot of ways we look at the beach as California. Just the sheer geography of California being that bigger, much bigger environment, and New York being a very tight, frictiony place, and how friction creates beautiful things, creates jewelry, creates a pearl. And perhaps part of what makes the New York School so exciting is the fact that we're linguistically experiencing some of that friction that comes from being in a very crowded city.
Well said. And you're such a New Yorker, aren't you?
Yes, definitely.
I joked the other day about your moving to Philadelphia. This was a non-starter.
No, well, I'd come down to Philadelphia more often if I could, but yeah, I've lived in Philadelphia. I have done my time there.
Well, you went to Penn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I have done my time there, but now I just visit my favorite people. I know I sound like W.C. Fields, like it's a prison sentence.
Yeah, exactly.
But I have done my time there.
All right. Mandana, we love you. Don't we love Mandana?
We do.
Yeah. And we'll see you next Wednesday at the Morgan. Anybody wants to join us, come to the greatest city in the world. Oops, I said it. New York City, to the Morgan. Providence is better?
Yeah, we out here.
Okay.
Prov City 401.
Oh, my God. You got to be kidding me, right? We're going to go to what some people say is the greatest city in the world next week, next Wednesday. We're going to be there at the Morgan Library at 6 p.m., not 7 as it's still on the site. I'm looking at it.
What?
6 p.m. We're going to be there doing a webcast so that Ton Speaks can join us from Siberia, although it'll be a bad time, I think. Bad time. Mandana, take care. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
610-616-3208, 610-616-3208. I'm tempted to play, so we can lighten the mood up a little bit, to play Bernadette Mayer's Chocolate Poetry Sonnet.
It's my favorite poem.
It's what?
It's one of my favorite poems.
Yeah, let's play it. And then I'm going to invite a whole bunch of people to talk about it. It'll be Anna, Davey, Lily, Amber Rose, Jason, and Gabe to talk about it briefly each. And then we'll see where we are. If we have one more phone call, we'll do that. Otherwise, we'll do final thoughts, and we'll be on our way. And next week is, anybody? Week 8 is?
Langpo.
The Language Poets. And we begin 3 weeks in what's called Chapter 9, 9.1, 9.2, 9.3. Weeks 8, 9, and 10. We're very excited about it. And in week 10, we have a special guest for our live webcast, and she will be here the entire day, and that is Tracy Morris, who is a star of Week 10. Tracy will be here all day, so if you want to make a visit from Siberia or from New York, please join us that day. We're going to be doing, folks don't know this yet, Tracy and I just worked out the schedule. We're going to be doing, she'll be joining our live webcast, and we're going to be doing an afternoon informal program right here in the Arts Cafe. And then a dinner for a gang. So that's week 10. Yeah, week 10. Okay, so I'm going to play Bernadette reading Chocolate Poetry Sonnet, and then we'll talk about it. Here we go.
Poem that I was telling you about. It's called Chocolate Poetry.
I'm going to start.
So I found this poem that I was telling you about. It's called Chocolate Poetry Sonnet. When my children were growing up, we never had candy at home, but when we went to poetry readings, I always brought them chocolate bars to make the poetry palatable or more interesting, or so they'd be relatively quiet. It only backfired if the reading lasted too long. Then there was hell to pay, but I deserved it, didn't I? After a while, if I knew the reading would be long, I'd bring 2 chocolate bars. So I began to think of long readings as 2 chocolate bar readings. Eventually, I'd bring 2 just in case, sometimes saving 1 for the next occasion. Poetry is as good as chocolate. Chocolate as good as poetry is.
She always laughs at her own poems. Oh, Bernadette. Okay, Anna, quickly. Anna, Davy, Lily, Amber Rose, Jason, and Gabe.
I love that poem so much.
What do you love about it?
Well, I love it because of what it says, but I love it even more because it makes me think of my mom. And it makes me think of the moms who have had to, you know, who can't just like get a sitter whenever they want to go to a reading, or, you know, your kid's sick and you just have to just fly with it and deal with it. You know, the number of times that, like, you know, my mom mostly like raised us by herself, and the number of times that, you know, if it was like a random day off of school, it was like, okay, we're going to work with mom. You know, we're going to the office with mom, or like we always went to the grocery store with her. We always like went and did that stuff. And like when I think of how much it must have taken for Bernadette to be able to like just have that, to share that part of her life with her kids, the like, I want to go to this reading, so you're coming with me, is like a beautiful, beautiful thing. But also, like, I think about how much of like her social life and her independence my mom had to give up just by the nature of having young kids who needed to go everywhere. And I think of all those things, the chocolate bars, the coloring books, the like the ways that we would like set ourselves up in like the conference room at her office to like keep us out of the way for the day. You know, this is a poem about care. It's a poem about responsibility. It's a poem about poetry being a space that, you know, maybe is not always welcoming to kids, right? There's that line about, you know, if they get restless, it's, you know, there's the naughty kids, you know, well, she should have gotten a sitter. They shouldn't be here. It's a poem about, you know, making space and holding space and whatever it takes to get you there to that reading.
I love the way she leaves, in the context of what you just so movingly said, and I love the way she leaves it open as to whose hell is getting paid. In other words, there's hell to pay, but it's not her for being a failed mom, even though that's what everybody thinks.
No, she's being an amazing mom.
It's like the fucking poetry community that can't handle these 3 kids who, if it's a long reading, they're going to get obstreperous. It's going to happen, you know? Like, don't give a long reading then. Don't be so kid non-friendly, etc.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go to Davy, then Lily. Quick thought, Davy.
I just want to say thanks to Anna. That was amazing. That's it.
Here's to the moms.
You know, when we,
and the
a few
dads
years
and the
ago, Anna and
caretakers.
Lily and I and some others in Writers House Fellows, we read everything. You know, we read all, and her kids are in so much of the work, and that's another kind of a bold thing to do, right? Get your kids in. Don't just bring your kids to work. Put them in the work.
Yeah.
You know, kids are part of the work. Thank you, Davy. Lily?
Thinking about how and why this poem fits in the New York School Week, besides the fact that Bernadette Mayer was a figure in that scene, I really liked the line when she says, like, I started to think of long readings as 2 chocolate bar readings. And I think a lot of what we've talked about today, whether it was with Schuyler or with O'Hara, is about the urban quality of the work, is more about cities being like this imposition on the environment, on people's bodies, on capital. And you just have to find your own subjective way and time through that space, whatever that means for you, whether it's looking out your window at sunset every day, or whether it's, you know, timing your day based on when your kids are going to sleep, like an Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or whether it's like on your lunch break, as with O'Hara, or with Bernadette Mayer, whether it's like I'm the time I'm pacing out for myself, kind of in opposition to, but also along with the city, is chocolate bar time.
That's beautiful. Bernadette would be very happy and embarrassed by all the serious, moving talk about a poem she thinks of as a silly poem. She knows better. Amber Rose, your thought on this poem?
Yeah, I also love this poem. And it makes me think of myself because I'm a snacker. People know me as a snacker. There's not a single class that I've ever been in where I haven't had snacks. I'm always eating during these webcasts. I'm like always, I'm always munching. I know, but that's the great thing. So today I wasn't because I was running late, right? And I was actually thinking like, damn, I'm not about to have no snacks. I'm going to be dying. But then I came in and this tea, Davey made me a cup of tea and it was here waiting for me before I even arrived. And now, even though I don't have snacks, I have this warm thing that I'm able to drink. And it's that kind of care. Like Davey showed me that same kind of care that Bernadette is talking about.
And the mug says professional. Professional friend.
Yes, a professional
Davey
friend.
Niddle,
Davey
professional
Niddle.
friend.
But we're always like, oh, do you want some snack? I'm like asking you if you want crackers or whatever. But the other
nice.
thing that I like about this is that it reminds us that we're in our bodies. When we're talking about poetry, when we're listening to long readings, our bodies aren't absented from what's going on. And the snacks or the drink or the tea or whatever is like our body being present. And that's such an important reminder coming out of thinking about Schuyler and like how we engage with poetry, what our bodies are doing. It's important to think about.
Wow, we're really rocking this. Jason, rock on.
His name's Schuyler.
Okay. I love this poem too, and I think that it reminds us of the importance and the emergence of women in the second generation, and reminds me, it actually reminded me of the way in which this community, it's in past tense. The other poems that we've read have been in present tense. And so it's a looking back, and it's probably a looking back after her children are a little older. But the fact that there would even be children at a poetry reading changes the dynamic of the poetry reading entirely. And I think, and I like that poetry is the last two lines. I like, it's not like poetry is as good as like a nutritious, like veggie shake. It's saying that poetry is good as chocolate, and they're both like events that happen in the mouth.
They really do.
Yeah.
Jason, stop doing this to us. You do this to us. You slay us. Thank you. That was beautiful. And now we turn to Amaris for a thought on the chocolate poetry sonnet. Amaris? Okay, I think her connection is not working so well. So we're going to go to Gabe for a thought on this. Gabe?
Yeah, so I share Anna's single mom feels. Though what I want to mention is, this is a really real scene. You go to a lot of poetry readings, you will see kind of this happening. Maybe not with chocolate bars, but that kind of management of the attention of the kid, or the management of the like noise of the kid. You'll constantly see parents like walking in or walking out or dealing with this, and it's really I think it's a lovely thing to see. I mean, I think if anybody's annoyed by it, they're being really foolish. But it's a lovely thing to see. I've seen poetry readings with poets like holding a kid in one hand and like a manuscript in the other. So this is just a real thing that happens in our like economy of being together. But I think what's interesting about this poem is the way in which like Bernadette and the kids are having to like come to some consensus about how the next, like, let's say hour will be spent. And that's where that equivalence at the end comes, where like chocolate is as good as poetry, or poetry is as good as chocolate is, like, in the sense that Bernadette can take up or occupy that amount of time with poetry. The kids maybe don't as much, so they have chocolate, and chocolate does that same, just occupying the time.
Yeah, also there's another reading of As Good As. I like your reading, Gabe, but another one is poetry is only as good as chocolate, meaning it is equal to, as good as. It is a transitive principle. Poetry is as good as chocolate, chocolate's as good as poetry, but really poetry is only as good as chocolate, the chocolate you happen to have. Okay, what I'd like to do is go around for final thoughts, final words. We're not going to take any more calls. So it's got to be quick, but some thought. It can be about the language poets. It could be about a poem that we didn't talk about that you want to recommend that people look at, read, hear. It could be a plug. But let's just stipulate that we're all plugging our office hours. Please come to office hours. It's a great way to interact with us. Before we get there, Tan in Siberia is continuing to tweet, and I just got a really nice one, Tan. A. Filreis, thanks for pronouncing my name correctly. So Tan, I guess, is right. It's kind of a big deal for me as a non-binary person to hear my name said by another human. One of the first times I've actually heard it since coming out. Definitely going to try to make it to the New York City Webcast. How the hell are you going to do that? Oh, to tune in. You're not going to travel. Okay. So, Tan, I'm so glad to say it. I think anybody, I'm sure Tan would love this. Anybody want to say Tan's name aloud?
Hey, Tan.
Tan.
Hi, Tan.
Hi, Tan.
So Tan, you are Tan, and we are saying it, and it's so cool to be able to reach across to Siberia to affirm you by name, by your name. Okay, so now final thoughts. Let's start with Allie, and then Gabe will be next. Anything you want, Allie? What's on your mind?
Come to my office hour. It's at 3 today. Please come. And I was just still kind of thinking about our conversation surrounding like light and color in February, and Anna's comment that that color kind of like lifts the poem, helps to lift the poem out of time. And then Amber's comment about light kind of just having an object in the poem kind of creates its own light, which makes me think of this kind of like fictional concept of when we read about light passing over an object, it kind of puts us in time. And I think that that's definitely happening in February, just in, the kind of light, like the grass and human flesh, I'm butchering that. But also just like the changing of color. So it's this interesting, I think that poem manages to just simultaneously like suspend us out of time and make us like feel time passing in our bodies.
That's great, Allie. Thank you for the final thoughts. Thank you for hanging out with us. What is the N? I think it's an N on your sweatshirt.
Oh, it's Northwestern. It's my brother's.
Go Northwestern. What's the nickname of this?
Go Cats.
Go Cats. Go Cats. Northwestern, not famous for their sports teams, but what the hell, right? Gabe and then Jason, final thought.
Yeah, I guess so my office hours are 3 p.m. EST on Mondays. Well, I just wanted to sort of recommend the poet Kevin Killian, who died recently, but is a really amazing thinker for a lot of the issues that we're dealing with this week, about celebrity, about cities, about space, about like that kind of more verbal form. Really smart, and this is a haiku of his, which is just mosquitoes in flight, tiny wings batting the air, eggs into egg cream.
I love that. Yes, Kevin Killian, rest in peace. Real loss to the poetry community, and too soon, much too soon. We're going to go to Jason and then Amaris. Jason, final thought.
Actually, Kevin Killian wrote over 2,600 Amazon reviews that are each a work of great art. And I recommend, and I just arranged to print a selection of them in a journal that I help edit called Fence. And the thing that I wanted to say about this, there's another O'Hara poem, which is the first poem in Lunch Poems, where he says, if I rest for a moment near the equestrian, pausing for a liver sausage sandwich in the Mayflower shop, that angel seems to be leading the horse into Bergdorf's, and I am naked as a tablecloth, my nerves humming, close to the fear of war and the stars which have disappeared. I have in my hands only 35 cents. It's so meaningless to eat, and gusts of water spray over the basins of leaves like the hammers of a glass pianoforte. And whenever I teach O'Hara, I take my class to the fountain that is the actual, if you stand in one place and you rotate around, you see each of these objects. There is a statue of an angel leading someone on a horse, and if they were to progress, they would walk into Bergdorf's. So, I mean, in a sense, the city creates the possibility of associative imagination, and at the same time, I want to plug Barbara Guest's early poems in the collected Barbara Guest, which are all about her children, and her children's voices emerge as the poems go. They interrupt the poems, and she refused to stop writing at that, and to let her children, to delight in the voices of children.
Thank you, Jason, for all three of those observations. So we're going to go to Maurice for a final thought, followed by Jess.
My final thought is actually a meetup plug. Jake Marmer and I are trying to put something together in Silicon Valley, South Bay. We haven't set a date yet, but we were thinking sometime early next week. So if you're interested and you're in the area, let us know your availability either through Jake's email or in the forums.
Thank you. I hope you're able to pull that off.
Yeah,
I'm really jealous.
great.
I want to come out there and join you. Maybe I will.
You should.
Can you guys do, Anna, can you do next week without me, Lily?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Great. Jess, final thought. Followed by Max.
Oh, no, you're good. Yeah. I think for my final thought, I will just quote a phrase from the instruction manual, and that phrase is, "As my way is." I just really like that. And I like that it appears in a poem about not following instructions and or imagining instructions. And I just like this notion of following as my way is.
Wouldn't it be great if we could also all just do things as one's way is, as our way is? It'd be really nice. Thank you, Jess. All right, we're going to go to Max, followed by Amber Rose.
I just want to shout out some of the forum conversations that I've been listening in on this week between Mandana and Wes Freeman, and also Hazy Saboznik, I hope I'm saying that correctly, and Lisa Geisler, just about these recurring themes that I think are important for this week about an openness or it was mentioned as softness in reading, approaching a text with allowing it to sort of shape your understanding of it as you go, which I know is something that's an approach we use throughout ModPo, but it seems to be really heightened in this week. It's an important thing to carry forward. And also the sorry, I just drew a blank there. I had something else I wanted to.
Well, while you're thinking of it, you met Rookie of the Year Wes Freeman in Chicago at the meetup, didn't you?
I had the privilege of getting to meet Wes, who may be tuning in right now. Wes told me.
Oh yeah, we're getting tweets from Wes. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Yeah. I know Wes listens in on these.
So is Wes as brilliant in the meetup as he is online?
Wes is certainly as impressive in person as he is.
That's great.
Online.
That's great. And I'll also note that Hazy is going to be joining us in New York, so we're going to meet Hazy as well.
Oh, cool.
Great. This is all a family. So Amber Rose, followed by Erica.
Okay, 3 rapid final thoughts. The first is Schuyler's last name is Schuyler, not Schuyler. I have a photographic memory, and the spelling of his last name messes me up. It's Schuyler. Okay, that's the first one. The second one is to encourage folks to don't skip over Patrick Rizal's poem, Uptown Ode. It's really, really good. And do check out Hanif's poem in ModPo Plus. I think they both, I love reading them next to O'Hara, and I think they both really complicate what the legacy of the New York School is and what that particular style is and what they include and how they include others. I think the New York... in the same way that Bernadette Mayer's poem brings in a focus on her relationship with others in a way that revises, I think, the singular subjectivity of a lot of the New York School poems, Hanif and Patrick do that in really brilliant ways. So check out those. And then the last thing is Sanjeev didn't get to ask this question, but it's brilliant in and of itself, and he's going to take it up in the forum. So I just wanted to say this line from Sanjeev, who is asking about the way that Ashbery lives in questions in his poems. He says, how do we parse his poems and live in the questions? Not just live in, but thrive amongst the questions. Because the answers, they can always be changing. But the questions we face in life are kind of more persistent, and the answers are always inadequate.
Lovely. You know, let's listen to the first 15 seconds of Hanif's take on O'Hara. Chris, you ready?
Yep. USA versus Cuba after Frank O'Hara. It is 3:15 on a Saturday, and I am in a car on I-95 on the way to the soccer game, and Nate is riding shotgun, which is also the name for when you plunge something sharp into a can of beer and split open its aluminum shell before swallowing its urgent sacrifice. And I once saw Nate do this 5 times in one night before the Mount Union game, and we got to the field late the next morning, smelling like something coughed up in the heat of a 1980 summer, and it was almost as hot then as it is right now in this traffic that isn't moving and hasn't moved for what feels like 30 years.
It
So
goes
good.
on, and
So
it's
good.
just so good. Great contribution. Thank you, Amber Rose. Thank you so much. I think we're turning to Erica next for a final thought.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the things I wanted to say have been brought up, which is a wonderful thing. So quickly, I've been thinking about Kevin Killian all week. I would encourage people to seek out his Amazon reviews. I'm sorry, the dog is making some agreements.
Is that a New York school dog?
She sits on my lap during the webcast because otherwise she will do this.
Is this a 2-dog treat webcast?
She obviously thinks I need to go now.
That's so great. Dogs are like kids.
Yeah, but I was gonna make re-emphasize Kevin Killian's Amazon reviews. I come across them often if I'm reading things on Amazon when I am looking at books that I might order elsewhere, and it's wonderful. And he's somebody I think also really embodies the New York school. Barbara Guest's early work I would also second. And then Hanif Willis Abdurraqib is one of my current most favorite writers. So I was going to give his work a shout out. He just had a new book come out of poems called A Fortune
for Your
Disaster. It's excellent. His first book of poems is excellent. And he has a really wonderful book of essays called They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us. So I know that's a lot. Sorry about Lola.
Lola seems to have found something else to do. I think you better check on Lola.
No, she's pawing at my leg. You just can't
okay. You know where Lola. That's so great. Webcast is only as good as the dog treat, I think, or the dog walk.
Yeah, I might also have to say goodbye.
All right. Thank you so much, Erica. Maybe we can work with Jessica to bring Hanif to the Writer's House next year.
Please do.
I feel like
He's far away. Cincinnati?
Wherever he is, he's not too far.
Okay, we can do that. Wow. That would be great. Maybe we could even time it for this webcast of this particular week. That would be fun next year, a year from now. Okay, want to turn to Lily, then Davy, then Anna. Final thoughts.
Yeah, super brief, I guess. Like our conversation about chocolate poetry sonnet has made me think about. I've just been thinking recently about how few poetry readings are, and a few other types of extracurricular or like non K through 12 or university setting type educational spaces are really important places where families can come and learn together and like be together in the learning process. And I've just been thinking about that a lot because I teach like an ESOL class for moms and little kids, and the scene depicted in Chocolate Poetry Sonnet is like very familiar to my ESOL classroom, and it's like typically thought of as like this interruption, but it actually brings so much into the learning environment. And I guess it's just, if you were inspired by our conversation today and you curate or run some kind of an educational space, it could be cool to think about how you could make it more friendly for whole families to learn together or for parents to bring kids in with them.
Thank you so much. Davey, final thought.
With Amber Rose, I want to think about the legacy of the New York School, but in a slightly different way. And this maybe also speaks to Sanjeev's thought about questions being persistent even though their answers change. So something about the New York School poems, the first generation of the 50s and 60s and later generations, anywhere between immediately after that to the present, is that they were part of a really different climatological moment. And I think I can't stop thinking this week about the majority of humans living in cities, and like the city really being like how we do with cities really will determine like how we negotiate climate change. And I wonder if the New York School poems, as poems that are good at thinking about the affective and material life of cities, have something to teach us for how to privilege the city as the site of like environmental futures, as well as the site of like all the sorts of cool collectivity and like interpersonal relation that they have in them.
Thank you, Davey. Anna, final thought.
I am still thinking about Chocolate Poetry Sonnet also, because, I mean, of the many reasons why I love that poem, as I already said, I didn't think that anyone could make me interested in sonnets again until I started reading Bernadette Mayer sonnets, because they're so subversive and they're so, like, twisted in the best way. And we didn't get to talk about this when we were talking about the poem, but like what a badass move it is to turn the sonnet form, which is traditionally held up as this like super high, you know, like you think about the sonnets that were written, you know, in like Shakespeare time and after, as being the form that's equal to like the highest concerns of like human order. But like, fuck you for if you think that taking your kids to a poetry reading is not a concern of the highest order, right? Like, let's think about the sort of daily vagaries of human life as being equal to, if not, you know, surpassing the form of the sonnet. And I just love the way that she brings that form into like the 21st century. And Lainey Brown, of course, her book Daily Sonnets is another version of this, and she's Lainey's talked a lot about the way that Bernadette's poems, Bernadette's sonnets and Bernadette's poems about her daily life as a working poet, working mom, gave her permission to do that same kind of thing in her work.
Some thoughts are swirling. Well, we're transitioning to my final thoughts, so this works that I can have some thoughts about this. But the idea of the gratitude people were hearing in Schuyler as an integrative force for visual work and apprehension, that is to say, perception. And then thinking about what we've been talking about with Bernadette and her kids, those are strong ties, right? Obviously, family. In a community, as Gabe was pointing out, where the people in a poetry community are generally characterized by strong ties. They know each other well, mostly. And then thinking about how, if we turn to relationships that are characterized by weak ties, such as the relationship that O'Hara has with Miss Stillwagon, and in fact with Billie Holiday, if we start to go backwards and we kind of reverse engineer our relationships with the Miss Stillwagons of the world as enabled by how we counterintuitively treat people with whom we have strong ties, that's a great way of creating a poetic community. I think Miss Stillwagon is invited into that poetic community that day. Okay, three quick things. One is a plug. This, for me, one is a plug for Larry Eigner next week. You're only going to find Eigner in ModPo Plus at this point. In week 8, Eigner moved out to California at a time when the so-called language poetry movement was really flourishing or beginning to flourish, and became a kind of sibling to that group, and really taught a lot of them in a way that is only now becoming clear. So look for Eigner. Second, back to Ton. Ton, a few minutes ago, tweeted, so that's how #ModPo Live made me cry. I came into this community 3 years ago for learning and words and bettering my own writing, but what makes me stay and cherish this time we're spending together during these webcasts is the sense of community and acceptance. Thank you, Ton, for that tweet. And finally, for me, Sharon Wells. So Sharon is in England, and she has really done a great job of forming a community of people who only know each other online through this and other massive open online courses, and this in particular. So she is responding in the forums this week to someone who said, quote, "My friend who is a doctor is now recommending online learning to her elderly and isolated patients, and they are loving it." And Sharon goes on to respond to this and to describe her group of online friends, and they really have formed a friendship. They've met up in, I think, Italy. They're just in touch with each other, a group of very different people. But one of the things they have in common is relative agedness, that is to say, a number of them are elderly, which is to say another number of them are retired, and retirees tend to be able to participate in massive open online courses because this is what they want to do with their days, and their days are theirs. Kind of like what's the phrase from instruction manual? As my way is. As my way is, yeah. So anyway, Sharon points out something that led me to do some research. She describes one of her group of online friends suffers from extreme debilitating illnesses, lupus, strokes, and a rare form of cancer. And this person's specialist doctor said that her cognitive skills have rocketed since she started online courses. So I began to look around to see if there's any kind of literature, medical literature and research on the relationship between increases in cognitive speed and skills and online learning. And the answer is, but obvious, but I hadn't thought of it, yeah. So one of the reasons why you see what we can only perceive, because no survey or poll is going to measure this accurately, because we have to ask about varying abilities, and it's a really hard question to ask, and Coursera seems not to be so interested in that. But one of the things that we've perceived anecdotally in ModPo over the years is a disproportion that is disproportionate to the total population of people with mobility issues, debilitating illnesses, and other forms of difference in ability, physical and otherwise. And so online learning is not only a way to meet people, but it's also apparently a way to keep your cognitive skills going. So that's a pretty great thing. Anna, thank you. Lily, Davey, good to see you as always. Amber Rose, Providence, better than New York. I guess we're canceling the New York webcast. We're going to Providence. At least your family will show up.
They will.
They're cheerleaders. Are they watching today? A little too early, probably.
Yeah, probably not today.
Okay, Jess, thank you so much. And looks like we only have Amaris and Allie left in the Hangouts. Thank you both so much. Jason, thank you. You're amazing as always. Chris and Zach. Woo! We're signing off until week 8, Wednesday in New York. And I believe Davey is going to join us, as well as Anna and Zach and Chris and Al and some New Yorkers. So we'll see you then. Have a great time. Bye.